All right, Bakari Sellers is with us. He wrote a book that came out how many weeks ago now? My Vanishing Country.
It's my baby. About 17 days ago, 2.5 weeks ago.
Kind of bizarre timing.
You never want to put a book out during the middle of a pandemic.
Right.
However, while we were talking about the systemic injustices related to the disparities with COVID-19, it became relevant to the times. And then with Ahmaud, Brianna, and George, it kind of became a book that people go to try to understand. I mean, I hope when people pick it up, they get some sense of understanding of what it means to be Black in this country.
So you broke down on CNN, what was that, about a week ago?
Yeah, it was last week. And the way it happened is I was actually on right after George Floyd's brother. And hearing that man's pain in his voice, it was tough. And I was on with Dante Stallworth, and I love being on with Dante. Dante is like our he's a new political commentator that we go to often. He has a really, really good voice and a wealth of experience and a different background. And they asked me, I was going through and I read a quote from Ella Baker. And then I just began to think, like, what am I going to tell my children? I have a 15-year-old daughter and I have 17-month-old twins. And that it just became very emotional because you realize that there is a group of people in this country who, won't give them the benefit of their humanity. Will see them as always being less than human. And people may be like, what are you talking about, Bakari? Like, Bill, do you know anybody who can put their knee on someone's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds? Another human being? That you can't see a human being as human and do that. They treated George like a dog. They killed him like a dog. And I just became overwhelmed in that moment thinking about my kids. And I actually, after that, I became kind of repurposeful, saying that I have to create a better environment, a better country for them to grow up in.
Well, we're taping this on Monday morning, so it's a little more than a week later. How are you feeling today?
I tell people that being Black in America is in a perpetual state of grief. And I'm hopeful because you have Taylor Swift come out. You have Roger Goodell even give. The only way the statement could have been better is if he would have said Colin Kaepernick's name. But
he wasn't going to do that.
He wasn't going to do that. But I can't get caught up in what he didn't say. I can just be very happy about what he did say. You have statements like Ben and Jerry's and Peloton. You have Mitt Romney even saying, like, we're giving Mitt Romney all of these props, and rightfully so. But you realize he hasn't come up with a singular initiative for Black folk or people of color or poor people. He literally just said that Black lives matter. Like, that's it. And
right.
That in itself is an achievement, an accomplishment. And so I feel hopeful, but George's body is not even in the ground yet. And the question is, where are we in 2 weeks? Where are we in, does the NFL have more than 3 Black coaches and 2 Black GMs, right? Will they ever let anybody Black crack the ownership ranks? How do we meet this moment? And, the biblical saying that faith without works is dead. I have a lot of faith and I have hope, but the work that goes into making sure that we eliminate these systems of injustice and oppression, let's see that be done. We've had moments like this in this country before. I hope we capitalize on this one.
It's weird to think that, like, calling something a victory that George W. Bush, and Mitt Romney, just by expressing like a tiny bit of disgust toward Trump, and then a tiny bit of support for the Black Lives Matter movement, became like such a huge story. It wasn't like they were out in the front lines, but it was like, wow, look at this. And it did make me a little bit hopeful that the Republican Party is at least going to try to look at Trump objectively now.
Well, I hope so, but I'm not the person to write this book. But I hope that some psychiatrist or psychologist writes a book about the power of Donald Trump making other grown men and women like just melt and around him. Like, he changes people. People get in his orbit, good people, generals, etc., and they lose. How should I put it? They lose all their testicular fortitude, right? That's how I'm able to say it on CNN. I just call it testicular fortitude. They lose all their courage, and it's just an amazing way that he this, first of all, even if Donald Trump loses in November, which I pray that happens, this Republican Party will be his for the next decade. I mean, he has really put his imprint. And, people say it's true. 35% of the American public are going to support with Donald Trump no matter what.
Testicular fortitude was the phrase that got me in trouble on my way out at ESPN. It was like the last straw because I did an interview with Dan Patrick and I talked about Roger Goodell that way. And I tried to I thought that was like a nice way to put it.
Was it that you basically said testicular fortitude or that you said it about Roger Goodell?
I think both. Because I think I was on like quintuple secret probation and I think that pushed over the top. I mean, obviously it's easy to be cynical in these times.
Yeah.
When the NFL gets involved and Goodell is going, yeah, okay, and seeming to show seeds of progress, I'm just skeptical. And the fact that he didn't say Kaepernick's name, the fact how they handled the last 3 years, I think we've seen a lot of opportunism over these last 10 days, and I don't know how legitimate it is. And with them, it almost seems like, oh, this is a good business decision for us to pretend we're embracing this. I am skeptical. What about you?
You've seen a lot of performance art. That's what you've seen. It's like you've seen the videos on Twitter and social media of like the girls getting all dressed up in LA and they wear the signs just to take the picture, like they're marching, and then they get back in the car and drive off. So we've seen a lot of performance art. And then we've seen stuff like Tiger Woods' statement. I'm a huge Tiger Woods fan. Couldn't be more disappointed in what he said. I mean, he could have kept that. But in terms of hope, I want to be hopeful. I'm trying to be hopeful. But like I said, we've been here before. I mean, the country in 1955 with the death of Emmett Till. And for your listeners who may not have ever seen that picture, Google the picture of Emmett Till. Google his face for allegedly whistling at a white woman. And we found out Carolyn Bryant on her deathbed as she was trying to get into heaven, she lied, right? They brutally beat him, and then they threw him in the bottom of the Mississippi River. We've been here before with the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where John Lewis was beaten, and you had the water hoses and the attack dogs, and the country was watching. And then just recently, I write about it in my Vanishing Country, my experience in Charleston with my good friend Clemente Pinckney, who was killed, along with 8 others in Bible study on a Wednesday night in Bible study. And the country, and remember the president sang Amazing Grace. And at that moment, I felt as if the country that I write about that's vanishing, the ideals, not just life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but also like love, justice, truth, peace. I felt for a moment in that moment as he was singing Amazing Grace that we would be able to recapture those ideals and it wouldn't be vanishing or fleeting for us. And we missed that moment. And so I'm afraid that we'll miss this one too. Our country is never on the issue of race. We've never met these moments head on. And it's going to require a lot of work and a lot of policy. And you can't change bad policy without changing bad policymakers. And the activism that we have from sports and entertainment, I hope is consistent. And we got to have follow through. One of the things about my generation is we're not known for being consistent. So that's what we have to have.
Well, what's the difference between 2020 and 2014? I've asked multiple people who have come on that question. It feels like the infrastructure and the maturity of some of the activists who just have more reps now with this stuff just kind of sprung into action in a different way than it did in 2014.
I laugh because it took no sports, no concerts, everybody staying at home, like literally locked in your house for white folk to be like, oh, we got racism in America. like it just took, the world had to stop. And we're in this moment. So what happens when people start going to work again? What happens when people start having these different distractions? The difference in this moment is this is a unique moment in history. This is like 1918 meets 1968 with a little 1928 Great Depression involved in it. We wanted a reality show president. Now we're all in Survivor, right? This is where we are. And we have these moments where we're meeting, we're kind of at the bottom in terms of economics, in terms of jobs, in terms of growth. And how do we rise out of that? I think is going to be the question.
I guess it's gonna take a long time before we actually can look back at this with some distance and really try to figure out what were the causes, who do we blame? I mean, obviously, Trump is one of the biggest people to blame, but let's say Hillary Clinton won in 2016. What is different about this George Floyd moment that, we've had over the past 2 weeks?
So two things. One, we're in a pandemic, but the pandemic would not be nearly as bad as it is. We do know that if we would have shut down, if we wouldn't have disbanded the pandemic office, if we would have kept our inspectors in Wuhan, we could have actually prevented much of the death and mass death that we've seen. So that's first. I do. This is not. This is because of Trump. It's kind of incidental to Trump. But since he's been elected, we've been having these conversations about race more often. I just say it's incidental to him being elected, and that's actually healthy for this country. It's one of the virtues that emanated from a Trump presidency. We would not be having these same conversations if Hillary Clinton was elected, right? But now that you remember Charlottesville, and I ask people this question all the time: what was the moment that stood out to you, or what stood out to you the most about the Charlottesville protest? It wasn't the fact that they were saying nigger. It wasn't the fact that they were saying Jews will not replace us in blood and soil. It's the fact they didn't wear hoods. They didn't wear masks. Racism is Stokely Carmichael defined it as this, and I always have to define racism first because people don't even know what we're talking about. He said that if you want to lynch me, that's your problem. If you have the power to lynch me, that's my problem. Racism is a social construct. It's a power construct. And so we're not dealing with the chance and people saying nigger to you. What we are dealing with, though, are systematic and systems of oppression and systems of injustice. And so when you have these people in Charlottesville who don't wear hoods, these aren't fat kids who are sitting in their grandmama's basement eating spaghetti off their stomach playing Call of Duty, right? These are people who work in loan offices. These are people who teach our children. These are people who work in dental offices, et cetera. They are a part of these systems. And when you have people, and that's why Deshaun Watson, that's why Pat Mahomes, that's why Stephon Gilmore, their words mean so much, because they are from these communities. They've made it out of these communities where you have these systems of oppression that, for many, prevents them from emerging.
You said with systemic racism, we're seeing it play out in two different ways. One was with COVID and one was with George Floyd. Um, Look, loaded question, but how do we fix it? Like, we've made little baby steps here with police brutality, and I do feel like from a police standpoint, there's signs of real progress here, though. And I do think there's going to be momentum. I think where it's really hard to make progress is a historical background in
Yeah.
everybody's own head about what happens. Like, what happened to your dad? I
Yeah.
feel like I'm 50. I feel like I'm pretty up on a lot of stuff, and I'm pretty good with my history, and I didn't even know about that, the Orangeburg Massacre, 1968.
Yeah.
Like, I literally didn't know about it, and I was like, eh, not ashamed, but I was like, "Shit, how'd I miss that one?" But the point is, there's been so many things over the years that, I think the history of this stuff really matters.
So you're right. And most white folk look at race through the lens of their lifetime, right? And so it's a it's not a dishonest critique. It's just not a full critique of how far we've come in this country. I will tell you that we've made progress. That's just a comma after that, though. It's not a period. Because I also will tell you, but we still have yet a ways to go, right? That's the sentence. That's the phrase. My father got involved in the movement in 1955 when he was 10 after Emmett Till was killed. He calls himself and many of those a part of the Emmett Till generation. And his first mission, as we call it, was to go to Philadelphia, Mississippi. Have you ever been to Philadelphia, Mississippi?
No.
Okay. Philadelphia, Mississippi is, I don't even think they have a stoplight in Philadelphia. But he went to search for the bodies of Goodman, Schwerner, and Chaney, who were killed during Freedom Summer registering Black voters. I talk about allies, Andrew Goodman, Mickey Schwerner, they paid the ultimate price while they were registering Black folk to vote. And then he went back to Orangeburg and he helped organize and became a part of the most deadly civil rights demonstration this country's ever seen. People forget or just don't know about the Orangeburg Massacre. We know about Kent State that happened 2 years later. White kids died. But we don't know about Henry Smith, Samuel Hammond, and Delano Middleton. And that's an injustice because their lives should not be in vain. My father was shot that night. I'll write about it in detail in my Vanishing Country. He was not only shot, but when he went to the hospital, he was arrested. He wasn't just arrested, he was charged with 5 felony counts, looking at a maximum of 75 years in prison. They denied his bond. And when they denied his bond, they housed him on death row because they deemed him to be an outside agitator. So they didn't want him in normal circulation with other inmates. They eventually gave him a $50,000 bond, which in 1968 was a whole hell of a lot of money. In between the time of his trial and February 8th of 68, all the officers who fired shots into the students were all tried. It was the first time that federal charges had been brought against law enforcement officers for shooting or harming Black folk. They were all found not guilty. My dad went to trial, 10 whites, 2 blacks. The lead investigator said he misplaced all the evidence, but he did remember and was an eyewitness, not on the 8th, but on the 6th, that my father stood on top of a fire truck, lit a Bic and said, "Burn, baby, burn." His indictment was backdated from February 8th to February 6th. And you know more than most people I know, but this is a random fact. My father is the first and only one-man riot in the history of this country. He was charged, tried, and convicted of rioting. On that night, injustice, it left mothers without their sons. It left the pages of, this country's history stained red with blood. And my sister was born without her father. My mother gave birth to my sister while my dad was in prison. And
he's 7 months, right?
Yeah, he did 7 months of hard labor, as they say back then. There's a big picture of he has his big afro, and my mom has her big afro. And you remember the Polaroids that you had to shake. They got another inmate to take the picture. He's feeding my big sister. That was the first time that he'd seen his daughter. And when I look at my dad today, people are like, "What does it mean when you say like perpetual state of grief?" Like, I see that my dad's eyes don't have the same glow that they used to have, or his shoulders aren't as upright from going through all of those things and losing so much. But then you have the images that we see of Ahmaud Arbery, who was hunted in a good old fashioned South Georgia lynching. And we just found out last week that the last 2 words he heard were "fucking nigger," right? And so you get in this sense of rage. Today we're going to bury George Floyd, and you get in this sense of kind of celebration for his life, but grief. And then it just cycles over and over again. And so, hopefully we're having necessary discussions. And I know you're asking, how do we fix it? Well, the first thing we can do is, I'm not the right messenger for a lot of these messages. I mean, Bill, you're going to have conversations with your white friends, right? Who have, blind spots that are the size of the Grand Canyon, right? They're not racist, but they just have blind spots. And I tell people that you don't have to march all the time. You don't have to protest. You don't have to write op-ed pieces. Sometimes you can just read a book and attempt to gain some level of understanding. And that way we can get to empathy, because right now we have an empathy deficit in this country.
So when I spent like 3 years writing my basketball book and dove into just everything.
Your book? 3 years?
I researched and read it. Yeah. I mean, it was 700 pages. It was too long. But really gravitated toward a lot of the information in the 60s, which I just didn't know, where you're talking about this league that basically starts changing color when Bill Russell comes in, but then really starts changing in the 1960s. But they still have all these biases in place, right? It's like you can really only have 2 black guys out of your top 10. You can't start 5. Then Red Auerbach starts 5 black guys. Everybody's like, what the fuck? What's he doing? He gives Bill Russell the coaching job when he steps down. And you go back and you read some of the stuff and watch some of the questions that he asks. How are you going to tell a white player what to do? And he's like, what do you mean? I'm the coach. And Russell was like the perfect person for all this stuff. The moment that the league had a couple different moments in the 60s. And when I talk about like the historical perspective on things, and you don't think of the NBA as a league way back when, guys like Elgin and Oscar, and you just know them as like the first wave of legends, right? But you're talking about in 1964, they come up with the Players Union. In 1968, Martin Luther King gets assassinated as the Sixers-Celtics series are going on. And
wow. Boston almost burned.
Well, and they don't know whether to keep playing or not. And the players are all trying to figure it out. And when I did a documentary about Russell in 2012, and I asked him, was it the right decision to play? And he thought about it, and he's like, "I don't know." He still didn't have an answer. We're talking, I don't know, how many
The
years?
crazy part,
45 years later.
well, right now that they're having a discussion because many of the players, well, half the players don't want to come back right now
Right.
because
That
they don't want to miss this moment. They want to be present. And so my answer to that is, first of all, I mean, I'm 6'5" and I am I'm still a rec league all-star, right?
right.
But I don't have the audacity to tell, Chris Paul or LeBron James whether or not they should play. But it's unique because I think the statements they can make while they're captivating an entire country, because everybody's going to watch the playoffs. Everybody's going to watch the finals. I'm more interested in hearing the referees talk because there's no audience. So we'll be able to actually hear the plays called out and referees talk and all the shit they talk on the court. But I think that the statement they can make on that platform is much bigger than anything else they can do. But that's interesting. I remember when you talk about April 4th of '68, Boston literally almost burned down. I didn't even think that I can remember the finals were going on during that time. And but for people like Bill Russell, but for people like James Brown, the city would have caught flames.
Well, that's why I brought it up, because I think the 60s, these guys had some really important moments that I don't know if they got credit for, all these years later, where NBA players were being put in this position. What they did publicly really mattered, and it actually really affected stuff. And now in 2020, we're seeing this similar moment where the players are coming back. I'm like you, I've heard various reports about, um, does everyone want to come back? If they
Yeah.
do come back, what do they say? And I'll be honest, I thought they missed a moment with the Sterling stuff in 2014 when, and I was doing countdown that day. Ironically, we talked about this on a podcast a couple weeks ago with Barnes and Jackson. Um, they ended up throwing their warm-ups in the middle of the court.
Yeah,
It
I
was an
didn't.
opportunity for a much more powerful statement, and I wonder, are they gonna take advantage of that in 2020?
Well, they are. I mean, because it goes back to this. A lot of it is performance because people are afraid of being shamed. I mean, you saw we turned Drew Brees into a cornerback, right? I mean, have you ever seen him backpedal so fast in his life? I didn't
It
know
was
that.
36 hours.
I didn't even know that Drew Brees, I didn't know he had any speed whatsoever. His hips were good the way he backpedaled. Um, but you're starting to see, I mean, you saw LeBron James jump on him. You saw Ed Reed hold him accountable. I mean, it's a level of accountability going on right now. I mean, Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace is speaking up in NASCAR right now.
Right.
I mean, so you have these voices, you have these moments. And, I do believe, though, I mean, a lot of these players want to say something and some of them just don't know what to say. But at the end of the day, like these Black players, they're Black parents too. And then when they reach out to me and are like, Bakari, what should I say at this moment? How do I meet this moment? I'm like, look, you ask the same questions I ask. Like, how do we raise a child during this time? The conversations I have with my kids are different from the conversations that white folk have with their kids. Like my daughter is now driving. She just got her permit. I mean, I'm about to start a GoFundMe to pay for her insurance because, good God, putting a 15-year-old in insurance is a lot. But, I have to tell her that when the police get behind you, dial 911, especially if it's night, and go to a well-lit area. Like, don't pull over because I don't want you to be Sandra Bland, but let them know that you're not running. Get on the phone and let them know that you have an officer behind you. You want people to know. Leave it on while you're talking to the officer. Even if you didn't do anything, just get home safely. When she goes out with her friends, Amy Cooper, like people have this propensity to not mind their damn business. Like Amy Cooper, like going up, who I thought about when I saw Amy Cooper harassing the birder? I thought about Carolyn Bryant, who falsely accused Emmett Till. She not only used her privilege, but she sat there and told them, she lied on the man and said, I'm gonna call the police and tell them that you're threatening me. Like I feel some danger. And that he could have ended up like George Floyd. So, these conversations that I'm having with my kid and my child today on this Monday that we're having this, she's going to a march today. She wants to march. She's going out with her mom. And like, why can't she just be 15? Like, why can't she just have the innocence of being 15? Like, why does my daughter now have to be a civil rights activist telling people that her life matters? Like, why are we so fucked up in this country that a 15-year-old now has to be on the front lines of civil justice? And so that's what I tell the players as well. I'm like, look, you're raising kids in this moment. and tell them it's okay that they can be unapologetically Black. Tell them that they can be proud of themselves. Tell them that their life matters. And then you go tell the world about the conversations you're having with them because they're seeing the same images everybody else sees.
Have you noticed that ESPN has changed their policy
I was
about
on,
talking about this stuff?
I was on talking about this stuff. They actually had me on First Take talking about this stuff. And I was like, thank you. Because it was me, Max Kellerman, and Dominique Foxworth, and had a good discussion about systemic racism on ESPN at 11:30. I mean, that is like, it's a powerful moment. So people now, and it's again, it took a pandemic, right? It took a pandemic and everybody staying inside. And it took 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I think people really are seeing how George Floyd died. And they're like, wait a minute. So when you tell me that you get nervous with your interactions with law enforcement, they don't all go well, like you just can't cry and get out of a ticket. You telling me that happens? Like they're more likely to believe that bad things can happen because they saw George Floyd handcuffed. The man was crying for his dead mother on the ground. In 2.5 of those 8 minutes and 46 seconds, he was unconscious and the knee was still there. And so I think like minute 2, 3, 4, you started to see the country awaken during that time. And again, the question though is like, we're in 2 weeks, like, where are we? In 2 months, where are we? Do we have more Black owners? Do we have more Black partners? That's a good question.
I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing or both, but it seems like celebrities are going to have an immense amount of sway. And they already have. We've already seen it. We saw it with Taylor Swift. We saw it with the reaction of NFL players to Drew Brees. We've seen it with some of the stuff LeBron has done. All great. Um, it just seems like maybe it's because of the social media era. Maybe it's just because of the power of fame, which has always been there forever. But people are going to gravitate and follow the celebrities. Do you think they are well equipped enough to harness that power?
That's a that's a good question. It's a really overgeneralized question you had over here. Some are. Like, I think Tiger Woods should just shut up. Like, you don't have to say something, right? Like, that's not even worth the paper it was written on. I mean, Tiger basically told us like Blue Lives Matter. I'm like, what are you writing, Tiger? Like, what is this? But I think that LeBron recognizes it. And so I have this theory, Bill. I'm glad you and I are chatting about it. I think that LeBron recognizes that the true measure of his greatness will not be on the basketball court. I think that there are always going to be these LeBron haters, right? Who will never give him credit. And the reason I give LeBron James credit for being a great basketball player is that no one in the history of sport has had that level of expectation set for them since a child and met it.
Yeah.
He met every expectation that people had. Now, whether or not you want to talk about how many finals he lost, whatever. I mean, he went, 10 years in a row, 9 years in a row? That will never happen again, right? And he's met it. But I also think, and this goes to the Jordan LeBron thing, I think that LeBron recognizes his greatness will be off the court. And he also recognizes that the only person he's chasing off the court are the Bill Russells, are the Kareems. And he's going to stay on the forefront of these things, which is really nuanced because what you have now is, especially after the 10-part series with Michael Jordan, you now have Jordan recognizing that it's different between being the GOAT, right, in basketball and being remembered as a great human being. And so you have Jordan now, I think, trying to realize that his life has to be more intentional. It has to be more purposeful. He's doing stuff behind the scenes throughout the Carolinas people don't even know about. I mean, he's helping pay for federal health centers and doing all of these things. And then the Jordan brand just gave $100 million.
Yep.
Right. His statement was powerful. Would you ever imagine Jordan in 1993, 94, 95, when he was the most famous person in the world, uttering anything about systemic racism? Like, where was he during Rodney King?
Did you read, Ray Thompson wrote a really good piece about how Jordan grew up in North Carolina and all the stuff that shaped all the decisions he made as a pro. And I thought it was really interesting. And I've read all the Jordan books and I've read everything probably ever written about him by anybody who had any sort of weight. And that was the first time I've ever seen anybody even tackle that angle. And it really did make me think like, oh yeah, this actually makes sense
Yeah.
that his career evolved the way it did.
But it's still evolving. That's my point. Like LeBron James has this head start on Jordan in this little category that's not so tangible of like greatness and contributions to society. And I think that's where that's where LeBron excels over Jordan. But I think that Jordan is so competitive that everything drives him. And I think he wants to be great and remembered for that too. So you see his activism evolving.
It's funny though. People always point at LeBron as like being the guy who can push the most change. And I don't actually think it's him if you're talking athletes. I think it's Mahomes. Because
Patrick Mahomes, first of all, the NFL owns a day of the week, right? And they're about to own another one. If college football,
they basically own 2 days a week. It's the most popular sport, and he is the biggest, most important player who is still not even in his. Is he even 25 yet?
He's not even 20. The crazy part about that video, though, is that you had Pat Mahomes. I still don't think he's larger than LeBron, but
I'm not saying he's larger than LeBron. I'm saying he's still at the beginning of his journey. And if he ends up being the Brady for this generation, and as he's becoming the Brady of his generation, he's also laying the groundwork from his mid-20s on. That's a completely different level with a bigger audience too.
I give Steph a lot of credit as well. You had Steph Gilmore and you had Pat Mahomes. You had the best offensive and the best defensive player in the league coming out and saying something. So the owners were like, well, Roger, they literally did something that we haven't been able to do with the league in 4 years, which is make them listen. So you're right on that point that Pat Mahomes' voice, is more than just head and shoulders commercials, right? It's like, we're going to raise the level and talk about systemic justice. And they do it in their own way. Like one of the people who I like listening to speak about their experiences is D-Hop. Like Hopkins tells you in that country twang exactly how he's feeling, right?
Right.
Michael Thomas holding Drew Brees accountable is important. I don't think it was the LeBron James comments. I don't think it was the Ed Reed comments that made Drew Brees backpedal. I think it's the comments by the person who catches 130 balls from you every year, who makes you look extremely good, who felt some type of way about what you said. And so these athletes from top to bottom, I think are more, I know during the 60s you've seen the famous picture of Jim Brown and Ali and sitting at the table.
Lou Alcindor.
Yeah. And so, but I think from top to bottom, this generation, I'm looking forward to seeing what my guys in baseball are saying. I'm interested to hear what Mike Trout has to say, for example. I want to hear what the best in the world has to say. And again, it's kind of weird that like Bryson DeChambeau is more woke than Tiger, but that's where we are.
I thought the Brees thing was so fascinating because 3 years later, and he's in the middle of it, his league's in the middle of it, and he didn't seem to understand the Kaepernick thing. And this was what was happening in 2017. It's like, well, honoring the flag. It's like, it's not about that, dude. It was never about that. That's not why Kaepernick did what he did. We did all this in September. Where were you? You didn't listen to any conversation about it?
I know. Like, were you not paying attention? And even more, the framing of his statement was just weird. Like, I'm like, you do realize that Black folk fought in those wars with your grandparents too, right? And you realize that your grandparents were able to come home and take advantage of this American dream, whereas Black folk went out and fought and then came back and were second-class citizens. They fought for your freedom and then were second-class citizens. Like, what are you talking about, Drew? That's why at the beginning of this, when it's a shameless plug for me to say, go get my Vanishing Country, but sometimes you just need to read a book. Like, Drew, like, pick up a book. Like, that's all we're asking. Like, you don't necessarily have to be a social justice warrior. That's not for everybody. But you can have a level of empathy and you can have a level of understanding, because what happened was Drew was put in an interesting position because Drew had a direct face-to-face with Donald Trump. And I was like, oh shit, this is about to be interesting, because if there's some support that Drew Brees does not need right now,
right,
it's Donald Trump's. So then he had to tackle that, because the last thing you want is for people to think that, you're carrying the banner for that White House. And so now he's cleaned it up well. Whoever's in his ear, he has some of the best PR people in the business.
He moved fast. Trump's like a shark swimming around the ocean, and when there's chum in the water, he just goes right toward it. It's like, oh, Drew Brees. Oh, just go right to him.
That man has not seen a culture war that he doesn't like.
Yeah.
I mean, if he finds a culture war, and I'm like, and people are like, why are you protesting in the streets? Like, explain that to me. I say, one, protest is messy, but two, you remember we tried to take knees and y'all called us sons of bitches? You do remember this, right? We were called un-American, traitors, sons of bitches for taking a peaceful knee. And Nate Boyer actually agreed. I mean, they had, the legendary conversation that Nate had with Colin Kaepernick about taking a knee and not sitting down and doing all of these things. And that wasn't enough. So now you're in the streets. And I'm hopeful that we'll begin to see some of the change we need in this country.
South Carolina, quickly, because that's your place, became the turning point of the Democratic primary.
Yes.
Improbable. And also Biden's best moment, because I thought that speech that he gave that night it was almost like watching an old athlete summon kind of a great 20 minutes, make a couple threes. And he just kind of was so presidential and perfect this one time, right? When he needed it most. Why was South Carolina? Why did that become the place that turned the election potentially?
Because my mama and her friends are the people who choose the Democratic nominee. Black women choose the Democratic nominee. And I kept telling people, after New Hampshire, after Iowa, we don't have a new frontrunner until Bernie Sanders can do something he wasn't able to do in 2016, which is to get Black people to vote for him in very large numbers. It won't happen. And I knew the level of familiarity. See, Black folk are more sophisticated voters than people in mainstream media give them credit for.
Yeah.
It's a level of trust that goes into it, because people know, like, we don't necessarily have to read a history book, but all we have to do is go down and we can talk about the people who bled and who slept on jailhouse floors, etc. And so that history is very real. And we know how difficult it was for us to attain the rights we've got in this country. So we're not going to vote for unknown quantity. And there is a certain level of trust and faith that goes into that ballot box, and pain that goes into that ballot box. And you're right. And Joe had to summon every ounce of his being for that speech. He just gave another one a little while ago on race from his basement. That was really good. And then I'm gonna need 3 solid hours from Joe Biden in the fall during these debates. So I don't know what he's gonna need. Get that man some of that ginkgo biloba or whatever they take. Give him some ginseng. I'm gonna need 3 hours, 1 hour in each debate, for him to go out and be as sharp as possible. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be really, really difficult to beat Donald Trump, and everything's going to have to go right.
Can we give him HGH? Can we put him on a program?
Can we put him on a program? Like, I don't know. I guess we have to go to some baseball around here to get him right. That's a good question.
Well, the approval rating stuff for him is about as significant. There's a good piece by Harry Etten about this recently.
Harry is so smart, and the only thing Harry knows better than politics is baseball. So
right. Those are his two things.
Yeah, if you ever want somebody on your show where you all can go tit for tat on baseball stats,
yeah,
Harry's your guy.
But he was saying Biden was over 50% approval, which is
rare.
The lead he has is rare, and Trump's disapproval, which was I think 54%, was almost historic.
It is. So one of the things people forget, there are two things, and one I can explain, the other one I can't. The Trump-Hillary Clinton election is a phenom because we had the two most unpopular candidates in the history of this country. And
going head to head.
And there's a stat that's really weird, but Harry can talk to you about it. They poll people who dislike both. All right. And when in 2016, the people who disliked both candidates was really high. And all of those people, a large portion of those people, voted for Donald Trump. You don't have that dynamic in this race. But for those people who dislike both candidates, of course, Joe Biden is winning by a large margin. That's the first kind of weird, nuanced stat. The
Yes.
second thing is 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump. And when you're looking at demographics, college educated white women are going to be the demographic that can tell you who wins and loses. And you got to have somebody else on your show to talk about why that's the case. Why did 53% of white women vote for Donald Trump? I don't have that answer. But that is what got him over the hump in the blue wall states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I don't think that's going to be the case this go round.
How about Harris? You think she's the VP?
I hope so. I talked to Kamala a lot. I don't think Klobuchar is in the running anymore after Minnesota.
Yeah, I would say cross her off.
If anybody has more historical bad luck than that, it would be her. Actually, it's a parallel. The Orangeburg Massacre, random history note. I talk about it in the book, The Overlay of Politics. Governor McNair was supposed to be the vice president in 1968. But the Orangeburg Massacre happened. And they were like, we can't have a vice president from South Carolina, even though you're a Democrat. We can't have a vice president where you have all that racial unrest and your officers just shot 30 kids and killed 3 of them.
Right.
And so that is a direct parallel between Amy Klobuchar now and the unrest in Minnesota. Like, we can't be VP because of that unrest. So I think that the final choices are I'm going to say probably, although I know a little bit, are Harris, Susan Rice, Val Demings, Lujan Grisham, the governor of New Mexico. And you may have Keisha Bottoms in there, but I think that it's a layup for them to pick Kamala Harris. The caveat, though, is Democrats miss layups all the time.
I can't imagine she doesn't get it at this point. What's the biggest thing, because you know her, what's the biggest thing she brings to the table with Biden, like, as if you almost think of them like a sports team, like Wade and LeBron or something? How does she compliment him other than the obvious reasons?
Well, I think she adds like energy off the bench. Like, she's instant buckets. She's like Jamal Crawford, right? Like, if you want somebody who can go out there and score you 50, that's who you get. Like Eddie House, Jamal Crawford. What's the shooting guard from the microwave?
Vinny Johnson.
Vinny Johnson. Like, she's instant buckets, right? She's gonna go out. And people are like, well, black people are gonna vote for Joe Biden anyway. That's kind of true, but you need them to be activated. There were 4 million people who voted in 2012 who did not vote in 2016. Of that 4 million, 1.3 million of those were black, right? And Kamala's going to activate the base like my mama. So now she's going to be on phone trees. She's going to get her sorority sister. She's going to stand up in church every Sunday because Kamala's on that ticket. If she wasn't, she'd just go vote. But she wouldn't be out there bringing along all of her friends, that 1.3 million you need. I say that Kamala's instant buckets off the bench, and she's going to be somebody that provides a lot of energy. And she's sharp as hell. And we saw the debates. I mean, her versus Mike Pence is going to be must-watch TV. Must-watch TV.
That's going to be amazing. You were the youngest black official once upon a time. What happens to you next 10 years? Because it seems like you're writing books, you're on TV, but I'm sure you make another run at this whole thing, right? At some point.
I'm gonna run for Congress soon. I don't know when. I got elected when I was 21 years old. I beat somebody who was 82 years old and had been in office for 26 years. And so, young people that are listening to this, like, ask yourself those 2 JFK questions, those 2 RFK questions. If not me, then who? And if not now, then when? Like, you don't have to be 40, with all due respect. You don't have to be 40 to go out and change the world, right? You can be 18, 19, 20. You can be 15, 16 and go out and change the world. And so I'm going to run for Congress again soon. I'm enjoying my job at CNN. This book is a New York Times bestseller now. So we're doing great work there, traveling the country when I can. I have twins that are 17 months old. So my wife and I playing zone defense. I don't know if it gets any better with twins.
No. Just from the friends I've had who has it, I think it gets better when they're about 7.
It's tough right now. Goodness gracious. And so, yeah, I'm gonna run for office again soon. We got to create a better country than we have now for our children. That's the number one goal.
All right. The book is called My Vanishing Country. It's available wherever you buy books, which is probably not in a bookstore still, but will be at some point. But you can just get it online. Bakari, this was great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Now, thank you for allowing me this platform, and I love your work, man. So keep it up.
Thank you. Appreciate it.